This is Judge Joe Brown, and you're watching We All Be News TV, the
News-Free Dixie.
News-Free Dixie for the 21st century.
I have on one and only Dr. Ernestine JenkINs, art historian extraordinaire, also very much knowledgeable about the history and the narrative of Black Memphis, all the way from back in the 19th century into present day. How you doing today?
I'm doing good.
And we are here on the day of the 125th anniversary of the lynching of A.L.L's three business friends, the owners of the People Grocery. Can you tell us a little bit background about that?
Okay. We're honoring the lives of Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and Will Stewart. They were some of the owners, the three primary owners of People's Grocery, which was located right here on this corner, this space, in which we stand. And Thomas Moss was especially close friends with A.L.L. And after those men were killed, then A.L.L. felt compelled to write about it, to speak out about lynching. And so, as the first Black woman journalist, she seriously took up the work of researching, documenting these stories of lynching. She began to travel around Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama. She would go wherever she heard a story about lynching, and she would gather the information. She was a real historian, researcher about it, and she would gather this information. And she was able to prove, being the first person to do this, that lynching was not about the raping of white women and the need to protect white women from Black men. Most of the cases that she studied, they were, if there was a sexual relationship, it was consensual. The white women screamed rape after it was found out about. But in most cases, she found that this historic violence against not just Black men, but women and children, was against the larger Black community and the successes that it was having in the late 19th century.
Good job, man. I like that. Oh, sharp and dapper. I'm sorry. I had to give his props.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Go ahead.
Yeah. So she found that lynching was really the result of economic competition and white people feeling particularly threatened by the successes that the Black community was having in the late 19th century, in spite of the spread of Jim Crow.
Let me ask you this. It's like a lot of African Americans don't like to talk about this type of history narrative. Like people talk about, for example, the recent remake of Roots. Yeah. Like people say we're tired of these slave movies and all this stuff, and like it's too traumatic for us to talk about. What's your take on them when people of color say that type of stuff?
Well, there are not a lot of things that make me angry, but when I hear people say that, that does kind of piss me off. Because it's like it didn't happen to you. At least you could sit down and listen to the stories that you need to hear about what your ancestors went through. Because if they hadn't gone through that and survived that, you wouldn't be here. It shouldn't be an issue about whether you want to hear another story about slavery. You ain't heard enough stories about slavery yet. You can't never hear too many stories about the slave experience, because that's how we got here. Those people that survived that. If anything, you need to be figuring out ways to honor them. Not just honor them, but you need to be figuring out how did they do it. Because if you can figure that out, how did they survive that? How did they survive living every day, being born into a slave system, knowing that they have to raise their children, get married even though that's not legal and their unions are not recognized, by their white slave owners. How do you think they managed to raise their children knowing that children may be sold away from them one day? Don't know weak people survive that. And if the Black community has any strength, and it does, that's where it comes from. You should be trying to learn all you can about that, because every people in the world don't survive that. I'm a historian. There are many, many groups of people in the world that did not survive the trauma that happened to them, and they've just been wiped off of the face of this earth, and don't nobody remember them. Yet the slaves, the people that came over here that were not expected to survive and expected to get free one day, they probably had that dream, you know, in their soul. They fought for it every day that they survived. Some of them fought and actually physically fought against white people. Some of them led rebellions. Some of them was just doing the work every day and surviving and raising their children till one day they would be free. You know, so ain't nobody done nothing for black folks in this country. They did it for themselves. Abraham Lincoln didn't free the slaves. You know, it was all about those people and how they survived that on a daily basis until they were able to get free. You know, that's our legacy. That's who we are. You know, we got so much to learn from that. That's a gift. You know, learning about your history and what your people went through. You know, why are we standing here today talking about 1892? You know, and having to learn that this stuff is still going on. You know, no, that to me that's just very ignorant. You know, and please don't say it's too sad. It's gonna make you cry. You can't go and see a movie about it. You can't talk about it or whatever. Like again, it didn't happen to you. You sitting here in 2017 in a cushioned situation. you know, your life, you really ain't got to struggle for nothing. Yes, there are terrible things still happening to black people, but you ain't really struggling about nothing. You know, so it's really a sin and a shame if somebody would say that and let that come out of their mouth. Oh, I can't stand to hear about that. You know, please.
How did this change, I guess, the future of Black Memphis, this event, this incident? How did it change it, in your opinion?
Well, it put Memphis on the map in a lot of ways that scholars who study Southern history and urban history are just beginning to realize. They're just beginning to realize the significance of African American history in Memphis. Memphis is unique, you know, because you had about 4,000 slaves here in this city. So in a sense, you've always had a large, significant black population here at the very beginning of the founding of Memphis in the early 19th century. Memphis ain't that old. You know, we're talking about 1812 and stuff. It's not an old city. But from the beginning, you had slaves here building up this city. And then during the Civil War, you had about 16,000 more people come into this city. They saw it as refuge. They called it that, the city of refuge, because it was Union occupied. And you could escape from the situation around you during the Civil War and come up here knowing that you were soon going to be free because of the direction in which the Civil War was going. You know, and then you had people stay here and build up this incredibly vibrant black community that today is known the world over just for its music. But even by the turn of the century, by 1900, Memphis was already a recognized black cultural center. You know, you had the first Hollywood musical made here in Memphis, Hallelujah, because King Vidor, famous Hollywood director, chose Memphis as the site where he wanted to film the movie because Beale Street was already famous as this center of freedom, center of black creative cultural activity. And this is before Harlem. Harlem ain't got nothing on Memphis. This is before Harlem. And he actually filmed on Beale Street. He filmed around in the Lemoyne-Owen area and stuff before the Lemoyne-Owen projects were actually built, when there was like a little swamp on Leenow Street. So, you know, this city, and it's because of the African American presence here. That is what really has put Memphis on the map. You wouldn't have had an Elvis Presley if it wasn't for the black folks that was here. You know, it is about us. You know.
So what will be the next thing going forward with this project? I know it was a special community year, but what will be the next step in keeping this going? Well,
I think that there's going to be more activity around the lynching of A.L.L. persons, which occurred in 1917. Those are the two major lynchings that occurred in the Memphis area that got international attention. The A.L.L. persons lynching, because it was so horrific, several thousand people showed up to that. But also because the L. Persons lynching resulted in the founding of the NAACP, which was the first local chapter of the NAACP founded in the South. And people forget that this was done through the initiative of Robert Church Jr. He was the one that spearheaded, called a huge meeting after the L. Persons lynching in 1917, met down in his father's place that his father built, the Church Park Auditorium. And several thousand people showed up because they wanted to figure out, what do we do, you know, as a black community? How do we handle this and stuff? And that was one of the things that came out of that meeting, was the founding of the NAACP. And so this year is the 100th anniversary of the NAACP, founded behind the L. Persons lynching in May of 1917.
Excellent. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I think that we're on a momentum, and we just need to keep it going. I think that black people in Memphis, at least the generation before us, my parents, they knew about that history. They talked about it all the time. That's how I got interested in it. But I think that what we have to do as younger people today, and contemporary scholars today, is to get this message out there, and events like this help, because you hear everybody talking about how they didn't know nothing about this. We ain't taught this in school, you know, and stuff. And this information could make a huge difference in terms of the success of black students in Memphis, if they would actually include in a curriculum history about the African American experience in this particular city.
Thank you so much, Dr. JenkINs. In the words of Greg Middleton, we love you madly. Keep on producing and pushing.
All right.
Thank you.